We are bouncing back from a terrible recession, and about time too. There's one problem. There is a big problem going on in the US right now, and I want to give my feelings as a Brit, but as one who probably knows a damn sight more about the Constitution than most Britons, and maybe a few Americans as well. So the American government are bizarre in that their parties are mixed up between two houses, and for their budget, their yearly budget, the federal budget, so to speak, the big government, both of these houses have to agree. And remember that these houses are split between representatives of, either Republican, which is generally the far right, or the Democrats, which are generally the near right and almost centrist type party. And there really is only those two parties there. And the whole of the states works on this federal system now. It used to be a state system out of the Constitution where all the states were represented, and they could be any party they wanted, and they fought for their own individual sovereignties. During the American Civil War, some states decided that they were so disgusted with what was going on in the Union that they wanted to break away and create their own. Those were the Southern Confederate States, and President Lincoln was in power at the time, and he is not what a lot of people think he is, not even what a lot of American people think he is. He is the moment at which all the decentralisation which was supported by the US Constitution was pretty much reversed. That's when the federal government became centralised. It's when it became party dominated from there on, and it's pretty much made state governments irrelevant, at least on the grand scheme of things. In fact, the federal government is not really supposed to be even talking about health care. The federal government has a remit, and that remit is really limited to imports and exports, a face on the world stage, declarations of war, and the funding of the transport infrastructure throughout the states. It's not really the federal government's place, constitutionally speaking, to meddle around with anything else. That includes healthcare, it includes education, it includes local laws. Those are for the state governments. Now, Lincoln changed this for two reasons. First, they needed a united front against the South. And that couldn't be done if they were all fighting for their own little individual pockets, so they had to fight for one thing. And secondly, he said that the reason he was fighting against the South was because no state has any legal legitimacy outside of its position in the Union. With that statement, what he did was he took all the power that the Constitution had given to the individual sovereign states, a la Washington, and he said, you do not have any right outside of your position under the Federation. At that point, the Federation became something, and it's grown ever since. And so you've got this situation now where there's the two parties, and across the whole of the states, everything's split into these two parties. And these two parties are at least opposite on the US spectrum. On any other political spectrum, they're actually very, very close to being the same thing. And along comes President Barack Obama, who wants to find a way of making a second income for the Federation. Remember that the Federation also supports things like the Supreme Court financially, for example. And he comes up with a method which sounds good in principle, sounds particularly, centrist left. And this is to provide health insurance for everybody so that they may get the health care that they need. Unfortunately, what we don't know, and what isn't so advertised about this, is the fact that in the US, the organisations that provide this sort of cover are in competition, and so that's wiped a competitive streak out of things. It's also limited a number of people's options. Before, you could choose any cover you like. Now there are only a certain number of packages you can choose, and not all of them are very good in what they cover. Sometimes you may have to pay as if you were covering a load of people when really you're only covering a few people. It also covers stupid things like student loans. And what it basically does is it forces people to get healthcare, and I think, well, it forces them to get insurance, and it makes money from those people who don't by forcing them to do it somehow. I did look into it, I can't quite remember, but it does. So it provides a basic stealth tax on health for the federal government. Obviously, the Republicans were quite horrified by this, took it to the Supreme Court and lost. They lost because the Supreme Court at the end of the day ruled unconstitutionally, and it did so because if it ruled constitutionally, it would narrow the income that was coming into the federal government and therefore the federal government's ability to support it financially. Money makes the world go round, not the US Constitution. So when the time came for the whole of the government to make a decision on what to do about the budget, because of course the parties are all are conglomerated, the US president doesn't really have his own party, so to speak. He's a separate entity in the checks and balances, and so he's reliant on the entire population of this government to come to an agreement, and of course they hate each other now, particularly over this, and so the Republicans have said, well, we're not going to back your proposal for a budget unless you stop your plan on the healthcare. And of course Obama said no, and so the money ran out, and the government began to shut down its preliminary services. A lot of those services are the services that it acquired after the Lincolnian sort of period. So these are the sort of things that the federal government should not be running constitutionally in the first place, okay? But it is putting a lot of people out of work, with the possibility that they are not getting paid, at least not until, you know, life resumes as normal, and this could go on and on and on and on, which is fine. I don't care what the US does to itself, but the US also has to agree on something called a debt ceiling, which is they have to agree that they are going to repay the sort of money that they've borrowed. Now, they can't really do that unless they are up and running, and it doesn't look like they're going to do that in time, which means that the US will then default on its payments, and that is the sort of thing that the countries in Europe were doing when the euro crisis was at its height. And what the hell is that going to do for the rest of the world? The long and short of it is possibly plunge us back into recession. So, yeah, it's you know, the basis of this is you either stick to the Constitution rigidly, or you don't. There is far too much picking and choosing, and I'm not just talking about the Republicans here. I'm talking about the whole bipartisan system. There's two things that need to happen. One that the US needs to sort out, and this is to put itself back to a constitutionalised thing. They need to get rid of the dominance of these two parties. They need a president who is going to decentralise the federal government and give power back to the state governors, and with it the responsibility to manage things like healthcare and things like that. The thing the world needs to work on now is getting if you ask me, a separate Western banking system that is not reliant on a very unreliable set of individuals who have not once caused us this problem, but look like they're going to cause us 2 global, worldwide recessions in the space of a decade.